With the latest agriculture news from across the state and nation, it's time for the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. Here's your host, Sabrina Halvorson.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us on the AgNet News Hour. I am Sabrina Halvorson, and joining me is Lorrie, my new co-host. Welcome to day 5. You have finished off the first week of co-hosting with me.
Thank you. I know, it's gone fast.
It has. It's been a good week. We have a few things that we're going to talk about in today's show, and I wanted to start off with, now this came out earlier this week, late Tuesday, early Wednesday, that Democrat Adam Gray has narrowly defeated Republican incumbent John Duarte for California's 13th Congressional District. This does flip the seat from Republican to Democrat. And it was an extremely close race, and that's why we had to wait so many weeks after the election to find out who actually won. But I think it was a margin of 187 votes for this race. And so for one thing, that really goes to show that your vote does count. Sometimes, especially in California, I feel like sometimes it feels like maybe it doesn't, but your vote does count. So 187 votes decided this race, and that's why it took them so long to decide this. But I think this is going to be very interesting. We know that Mr. Gray will have some big shoes to fill when it comes to speaking up for agricultural issues, because Congressman Duarte, a farmer, himself, of course, was a good voice for farmers around California and around the nation. He was also on the House Ag Committee. He spoke up quite a bit about legislation that farmers either needed or definitely did not need. So I'm really interested to see what Adam Gray will do in this seat as well.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot of information on him. I'm not real familiar with him, to be honest with you, but this seat is very important because it does cut through 5 counties in California, kind of the Farm Belt seat, if you will. So It is very important, whoever sits in this position. Do you know much about his background by chance? Does he have an agriculture background?
Yeah, I do. I've had the ability to interview him several times, actually, through the years, because he was a state senator before this, and he's from the area, born and raised in Merced, so right there, in the center of the Central Valley, and he has had a big focus on agricultural issues himself. So, which is good. He's done a lot with water issues around California. He's talked about, or he's done things with, farm labor. He's kind of a very middle of the road. He does, he is a Democrat, but he's, in fact, I think he's even like self-proclaimed radically central, which is actually very much how this area kind of runs. We're the more Republican side of California, but it's almost what you could call like a purple district, or region, I guess, because while it is more Republican in the Central Valley than in the rest of California, we still do also have a very heavy Democrat basis. So, and even a lot of people will like vote across party as well. So a lot of issue voting rather than R or D kind of voting going on in this area. So it's an interesting area. It's my home, so of course I love it. But it'll be interesting to see how he goes on a national level from his, serving in the state level, to see these issues on a bigger stage. And I'm really interested in that. Again, Congressman Duarte, like I said, he brought California ag to the forefront quite a bit, especially in the House Ag Committee, and the other committees that he served on. So I'm hoping, I don't know how this works. I don't know if it will work out, but it would be nice if Mr. Gray was again on the House Ag Committee. I always like we do have other representatives there. Jim Costa is on the House Ag Committee. We've got LaMalfa is on the Ag Committee, and a few others. So, but I want to stack it with as many Californians as we can. We got to do something against all those Midwesterners, You're laughing.
Yeah. I see both sides of that, Sabrina, both sides. But I kind of answered part of my own question too, as you were visiting. I just did a quick little search of him too, just to learn a couple more tidbits. And you probably already knew this, but he's a grape and an almond farmer. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of cool. He really does have the boots on the ground experience. And here's another point about him. You and I both cover water issues. I think I spend a lot of my time, especially over the years, but even recently as a farm broadcaster, talking about water issues and water management. And so he's been very critical of state water management in California. Yes. And being somebody who monitors water, there's a lot of criticism on how Colorado and California water is managed.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good that he has some engagement in that and some investment in that, because it is complicated, and to have somebody who knows about that in Congress is crucial for the ag industry as a whole.
Absolutely. And you kind of nailed it there. Having people who know it firsthand, who have dealt with these issues firsthand, not just as a lawmaker, but also in their personal and professional lives, I think makes a huge difference, especially when when you have lawmakers from other states that have no idea the issues that we face. How is somebody from, I don't know, New Jersey, and New Jersey, please don't come after me for this, but how are they going to understand California's water issues? It's just so different from the rest of the nation. We have to have people who are completely involved in the situation representing us in Congress. And both of these men obviously do, but it is good that we have another person coming into office who understands these issues.
Absolutely.
So we're going to take a quick break. Now, when we come back, we have a very interesting lawsuit that we want to talk about and how it applies to the agriculture industry. So we'll be back in just a moment to talk about that. This is the AgNet News Hour, and we'll be back in just a moment. This segment is brought to you by Live Earth Products. To get to know a little more about Live Earth Products, we're talking on the phone today with Vice President Russell Taylor. Live Earth, from what I understand, is celebrating 35 years in the industry. Tell us a little bit about how the company has evolved over those years.
Yeah, so it's interesting. 35 years ago, when we were promoting humates to do some of these things, such as nutrient use efficiency, at the time, fertilizers were very inexpensive, and some of these regenerative agriculture and soil building ideas were fairly nascent. They weren't embraced by mainstream agriculture and mostly encouraged by hippies and some of these environmentalists. So it's really changed in the last 35 years, where nutrient use efficiency has become a big deal. And all of a sudden, these ideas that we were talking about the 80s that weren't very mainstream are quite in the main now. And I joke that we were cool long before we were cool. We just didn't know it. But the truth is, to be a leader and a visionary in this industry, it took 35 years for us to really realize that these products are needed and necessary for modern agriculture.
So looking to the future then, any new innovations, new products that Live Earth is working on that you want to talk about now?
The most interesting thing is the effect on these products on Western soils. Now, sometimes with a old product, a new application makes the product new again. And the one thing we're seeing is, particularly in Western soils with high calcium and high lime, that humates actually help react some of the sodium in the soil and make a beneficial use of the calcium that's already in your soil. We did some trials with the Tulare pistachio trial, and we saw the salts in that soil profile move. We saw them immediately respond to the application of the humic acids and the humates and mitigate some of the effects of those salts. So while these are old products, it's given farmers a new tool to combat some of their salt issues, which is an ongoing and continual problem in California.
To get to know more about Live Earth products, you can visit them online at liveearth.com. That is spelled LIVEARTH.com.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halvorson.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. I am Sabrina Halvorson, and she is Lorrie Boyer. Lorrie, you brought this to mind, so why don't you tell us about this lawsuit that happened in Italy?
Yes. So here's what I know about it. Bloomfresh International Limited, we just call it Bloomfresh for short. They are a fruit breeding company, and they recently won a victory in court in Italy because of the infringement of their proprietary varieties. So a court in Bari, I think that's how you say it, Bari, ordered the infringing grower to remove all illegal vines. So in other words, this grower, and I don't have the name of the grower here, but a grower in Italy actually took this vine, IFG11, which I just mentioned. Some might know it more as Sugar Crisp, and they were planting it, and they were raising all the fruit off of this vine, and they did not get permission from Bloomfresh, nor did they have any records, that they didn't file any records. There was no conversation. There was no background that this company was going to be doing it. Bloomfresh found out about this and went to court, and so they won. But I think that it's important because this can happen anywhere. And I'm sure there's been suits here in the United States. This happens to be the one we're focusing on today because it's recent. But it really goes to show how important proprietary varieties are and how important it is when you're using certified seed, or in this case, certified vines, if you will, that you are doing things right, because this grower is going to have to pay a lot of money and possibly be put out of business because of this.
Yeah, it is so interesting because these, like you said, the intellectual and proprietary rights, that's something that we think of. I don't know. I mean, I personally have not always thought of this as an agricultural issue, but it is because these varieties are developed by companies and they are very specific. They have a specific taste. They have a specific growing methods, and the company owns them. And you can't just go out and plant it and then plan on selling these grapes, without going through the proper channels. And it's so interesting to me to think about, especially in the way of food, that it is owned by somebody, that these particular flavors are owned by a company, and you can't just go out and plant them and sell them on your own.
And if you think about how much money and time that a company like Bloomfresh has invested into growing these proprietary vines, or any company, any research and development company, that's what they do. It's just not fair. I mean, it's
Right.
just not a fair thing to do. And the integrity and the whole thing just kind of gets ruined when you're not doing things right. And then, of course, it's confusing to consumers too on what's going on. And especially if they're raising brands and they're calling them things like Sugar Crisp, and then another company comes along and maybe they're using something similar in what they're calling it. It is so confusing to a consumer as well.
Right, it is. And you want to know that, well, I think that there's been this push in buying to honor the people you're buying from. And I don't know how else really to put that, but to make sure that you're buying something that's authentic. And we're not just talking about, shoes or purses or whatever, but when it comes down
Right.
to your food as well, this is, brand name food, if you will. If you're buying Sugar Crisp grapes, you know what you're buying, you know what you want, and it's important to honor the company that created that instead of going for knockoffs, if you will. I mean, they're the same thing, but they're just being produced illegally. In fact, the grower also will face civil damages. He's going to have to pay back, or the company will have to pay back money, and quite a bit of it too. I don't know exactly what it is yet, but I do know that they, will be there will be civil damages in this case as well.
Yeah, I think that information has yet to be released on the total cost. And
Yeah.
like you said, the civil penalties from this. But I would venture to say most of our listeners that are with us right now would agree that in the agriculture industry in general, we really count on handshake deals. We really count on integrity and doing business the right way. So when a company comes along and does this, it kind of shakes everyone up, I think.
Yeah. And it's surprising too, the Italians have been very protective over their I mean, down to like, you can't name cheese a certain way.
Oh.
You remember like the whole Parmesan naming cheeses, that kind of thing. If it's not from whatever region, it can't have that name. They've been very protective over it. So to have this come from an Italian company.
Well, like we said as we started, the ramifications for the entire ag industry are at stake here. So it is a big deal.
Yeah, and you said it too, virtue and integrity are important in the agriculture industry. It's something that has been aligned with agriculture and should be aligned with agriculture. Integrity. I mean, we're talking about our food, for goodness sakes. We want to have integrity when it comes to our food. And anytime that there is something that really breaks that confidence or that consumer trust, or business to business confidence, business to business trust, I think is just, it's damaging.
It's damaging. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in this world that we live in, where consumers want to know where their food comes from, and transparency, and we're monitoring and we're tracking and we're labeling food, this can be a huge disruption to all that and can jeopardize all those efforts and all these money and tax money and all the promotion and all the work that our ag industry affiliates have done and all the organizations representing the ag industry. I mean, this just goes against all the work that has been done to move this forward. So if a consumer is purchasing this particular grape and they think it's coming from Bloomfresh, for example, and it's
Mhm.
not, it jeopardizes that whole thing.
Right. It sure does. All right. Well, we need to take another break, but when we come back, Lorrie will be back with her interview for today, and then I will be returning later on in the show. This is the AgNet News Hour, and we'll be back in just a moment.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Lorrie Boyer.
In today's segment, we talk about research that is being done in California's Central Valley with regard to land sinking in the agricultural areas. As for my guest here today, could I please get you to go ahead and tell us your name and your title?
Rosemary Knight, professor of geophysics at Stanford University and senior fellow at the Stanford Woods Institute for the Environment.
I'm Matthew Lees, and my role is a research associate in environmental engineering at the University of Manchester in the UK.
I think it's important to get out that the study was done while he was a PhD student in geophysics at Stanford.
That's almost exactly what I was just going to ask.
Okay.
A little bit differently, but what the connection was. Let's talk more about the study. For short, I put sinking lands, which seems to be a pretty big issue in the farming areas of California. So, Rosemary, I'll just start with a general question to you. Tell me what specific area you studied and kind of a little bit of background on where this even initiated from.
So the area we studied is the San Joaquin Valley, which is the southern part of the Central Valley in California. My passion is figuring out how we can use new technologies, either from satellites or airborne or ground-based, to study groundwater systems. So our working out there really dates back close to 8 years ago now, when we started collaborating with Aaron Fukuda at the Tulare Irrigation District. He has a challenging issue of how to balance water needs and water scarcity. And we were very interested in seeing how some of the work we were doing at Stanford, how our research could play a role in the whole knowledge into action part of what we do. And Aaron has been a fabulous collaborator in that respect. Looking at the San Joaquin Valley, if you look at any maps showing land sinking, it's ground zero. And land sinking basically tells you that there's overdraft occurring. And overdraft is simply the water coming out is exceeding the water going in. So if you take 100 acre feet of water out and you put 80 feet of water go back in through natural processes such as rainfall and from streams, you've got an overdraft, like your bank account, in this case of whatever the units I was using. Did I say 100 acre feet out, 80 acre feet in? You've got 20 acre feet overdraft. So having a water system out of balance, there are going to be problems. And one of the problems is the land sinking. And what we did in this study was to identify where exactly the problem was. Where is the overdraft causing the sinking?
Is the study over? Is it concluded, or is it still ongoing?
I'm a university professor. It's never done.
Okay, fair point.
So this has been a great study in allowing us to step back, big picture. What's going on here? What's the path forward? Should we be completely pessimistic or optimistic? I tend to be an optimist. And so it's given us ideas about how to move forward in this area and look at potential solutions. What we're doing now is integrating what we see in this study with other information we have from the San Joaquin Valley, acquired using a helicopter deployed geophysical system that allows you to see beneath the ground surface and image what's down there. So thinking about what's down there helps us think about how we could increase the amount of water getting into these problem zones. I have purposely not told you the punchline because I'm saving it for Matt. So,
and I want to come back to next steps here in just a little bit. Matthew, let me ask you. So, being a part of the study, tell me what some of this first question, then I'll ask you that question. Have you found that most of the overdraft, I guess, if you will, is that as a result of irrigation, or are there other things that are causing that as well?
Yeah, it's irrigation. By far the largest cause of groundwater extraction in the San Joaquin Valley is irrigation for agriculture. It varies depending on the year. So in wet years, there's often more surface water available, so farmers are turning less to groundwater extraction. But even so, even in a wet year, the extraction from the groundwater due to for farming purposes, for agriculture and irrigation, far exceeds that for domestic or industrial use.
What were some of your other findings, some other points to your study that you took part in?
The purpose of this study was to take a big picture look at how much of this subsidence is occurring today. And the reason to do that is that this is not a new problem in the San Joaquin Valley. Between 1925 and 1975, there were areas that sunk by more than 30 feet. This was one of the largest subsidence incidents that's ever taken place anywhere in the world. What we found in our study is that the amount of subsidence that's occurred in the last 20 years has now matched that which occurred in the 1925-1975 period. So not only was this once a dramatic problem, it's happening again today.
Matthew, first off, I'm going to assume that the word subsidence means sinking.
That's right. Yeah, subsidence just refers to the sinking of the land surface.
Then what made it, I guess, come back up? What made the water levels come back up, or maybe the sinking not occur so much between 75 and 8 years ago when you started the study?
So there's this quiet period of about 50, how many years? Of about 25 years. I'll say that again. There's this quiet period of about 25 years. And what caused that is the import of surface water through aqueducts and canals. That's the primary cause. So in the 70s and 80s, the California Aqueduct and the Frank-Kern Canal came online, and they started bringing huge quantities of surface water into the San Joaquin Valley, which were then able to be used for the irrigation needs, stopping the need to pump groundwater. So it was not the case that farming stopped or irrigation stopped. The water source changed. In the last 25 years, so since about 2000, what's changed is a few things. There's been land use changes, so different crops are being grown today to what was grown before, and there's a potential idea that more irrigation water is needed. On top of that, we have a series of droughts which have been more severe than those that were occurring during the quieter period. And the third factor that's quite significant is that the amount of surface water available has been reduced. So the amount coming in through these canals and aqueducts has been reduced because there's much more of an awareness of environmental issues. So environmental flows in rivers are in the 2000s an issue. In 1975, no one's much worried about that. So there's these three factors that together have meant there's less surface water available. Potentially there's an increase in irrigation demand. So the groundwater pumping goes right back up again.
I'm visiting with researchers Rosemary Knight and Matthew Lees, and we'll continue the conversation right after this.
This segment is brought to you by Live Earth Products. To get to know a little more about Live Earth Products, we're talking on the phone today with Vice President Russell Taylor. Live Earth, from what I understand, is celebrating 35 years in the industry. Tell us a little bit about how the company has evolved over those years.
Yeah, so it's interesting. 35 years ago, when we were promoting humates to do some of these things, such as nutrient use efficiency, at the time, fertilizers were very inexpensive. And some of these regenerative agriculture and soil building ideas were fairly nascent. They weren't embraced by mainstream agriculture and mostly encouraged by hippies and some of these environmentalists. So it's really changed in the last 35 years where nutrient use efficiency has become a big deal. And all of a sudden, these ideas that we were talking about the 80s that weren't very mainstream are quite in the main now. And I joke that we were cool long before we were cool. We just didn't know it. But the truth is, to be a leader and a visionary in this industry, it took 35 years for us to really realize that these products are needed and necessary for modern agriculture.
So looking to the future then, any new innovations, new products that Live Earth is working on that you want to talk about now?
The most interesting thing is the effect on these products on Western soils. Now, sometimes with an old product, a new application makes the product new again. And the one thing we're seeing is, particularly in Western soils with high calcium and high lime, that humates actually help react some of the sodium in the soil and make a beneficial use of the calcium that's already in your soil. We did some trials with the Tulare pistachio trial, and we saw the salts in that soil profile move. We saw them immediately respond to the application of the humic acids and the humates and mitigate some of the effects of those salts. So while these are old products, it's given farmers a new tool to combat some of their salt issues, which is an ongoing and continual problem in California.
To get to know more about Live Earth products, you can visit them online at liveearth.com. That is spelled LIVEARTH.com.
Welcome back as I am talking with Rosemary Knight and Matthew Lees, both who have done research while at Stanford University on sinking land in California's Central Valley, particularly in agricultural zones. How do you know the land is actually sinking?
Much of the recent evidence that the land was sinking has come from satellite-acquired data sets.
What are some of the things, Rosemary, that can be done to help stop the sinking of the land?
Over the last several years, there's been a real growth of enthusiasm for figuring out how to get more water back in. It's all about balancing the water coming out versus the water going in. And there's natural replenishment of the groundwater systems. The word everyone uses is recharge. You're recharging, refilling the groundwater system. There's natural recharge, but it just can't keep up with the extraction of water, the pumping of water. And so a phrase you'll hear a lot is managed aquifer recharge. So that means we come along and manage ways of getting more water into the ground. And in Tulare Irrigation District, the group we've been collaborating with for quite a while down there, the growers in the area are volunteering their land, their orchards during the winter months or fallowed fields, and directing what is considered to be excess surface water during the winter months and flooding their fields so that the water then percolates downwards and gets into the groundwater system and recharges or replenishes the groundwater system. Now, an important part of the study, the punchline, as I like to say, was that not all overdraft is equal in terms of causing subsidence. You can have overdraft in the shallow part of the groundwater system where you have shallow wells down maybe 10, 20 meters, and you can pump the water out and then you can put the water back in through recharge or natural processes. It's when you're pumping in the deeper aquifer, which is where your more expensive wells tend to be. So it's where the agricultural wells tend to be. When you're pumping from that deeper zone and you have overdraft in that deeper zone, that overdraft causes subsidence. So shallow overdraft doesn't cause subsidence as directly. Deeper overdraft definitely causes subsidence. So when it comes to managed aquifer recharge, we need to be sure that the recharge water is getting down where it needs to be. We need to ensure that we are recharging in such a way that there's connected pathways, if you like, to get that water down to where the problem's occurring. What we're doing now with Tulare Irrigation District, for example, is working with geophysical data that has been acquired in the area that can image where there are these pathways of connected permeable materials, pathways of sand and gravel. So if you flood a field here, that pathway can move the water to here.
Is there anything else you would like to mention here today that I haven't asked about?
Yeah, so one of the other things that this study highlighted is we were able to take a look at the estimate of how much water there is available for this recharge. So how much extra surface water is out there? This could be kind of flood water that's traditionally a flood water that we can essentially skim off the top and redirect for recharge. What we found was that the amount of sinking is almost exactly equal to this amount of available recharge water. So the question is, are we going to use every drop of that water for the subsidence problem? The answer is no, we're not. In reality, there are many priorities for recharge, including recharging this shallow water, particularly where it's being used by for domestic purposes. So it's not plausible that all of this water can be used to target subsidence. What we instead recommend, or what we instead suggest in our study, is that we really need to be strategic. So that water that we are able to use for subsidence, let's target it to the places where the subsidence is causing the worst issues. This might be places where it's damaging canals and aqueducts. This might be places where it's causing flooding, areas that now flood that never seemed to flood in the past. And it also might be areas where farmers are having to regrade their fields very frequently in a way that they weren't having to do before the subsidence started. So one of the key findings that we make is really to be strategic with where we're targeting subsidence.
Thank you to my guests here today, researchers Rosemary Knight. She is in the Department of Geophysics with Stanford University, and Matthew Lees, who did his PhD study also in the Department of Geophysics at Stanford University, studying land sinking in California's Central Valley. I'm Lorrie Boyer, and we'll be back with Sabrina Halvorson right after this.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halvorson.
For this segment, we're going to the National Cattlemen's Beef Association with an important topic for cattle producers. Here's Hunter Ehrman.
The week of Thanksgiving, we heard an update from the U.S. Department of Agriculture that New World screwworm, a parasite, was detected in Mexico. This raised alarm bells for the U.S. cattle industry, and NCBA has been in action to educate producers and push for more resources to protect our border from the New World screwworm. For the latest information, we're joined now by NCBA's Chief Veterinarian, Dr. Kathy Simmons. Dr. Simmons, what is the latest information on the New World screwworm?
Hello, Hunter, and thanks for the opportunity to talk with you today. New World screwworm is a reportable condition involving an infestation in the body tissues of the larva of the New World screwworm fly. These flies lay their eggs on and around the body orifices or the wounds of warm-blooded animals, including humans. The eggs develop into larvae within about 12 to 24 hours and are difficult to detect in these wounds in the first 1 to 2 days. Larvae will bury into the flesh of the animal and eat living tissue with their sharp mouth parts, similar to a screw being drilled into wood, and hence their name. After feeding through 2 molts, larvae leave the wound in 7 days, fall to the ground, and pupate into adult flies. Female flies mate only once in their 30-day lifespan. So needless to say, the infestation of larvae in the tissues of animals like cattle causes severe inflammation and secondary infection. If untreated, cattle can die within 7 days of a New World screwworm infestation. And New World screwworms recently, over the past year, migrated from South America, where it's endemic, into Panama, and then through Central America to Guatemala. On October 29th, Guatemala reported to the World Organization for Animal Health cases of New World screwworm. Guatemala borders Mexico in the south, primarily at the Mexican state of Chiapas. Mexico immediately instituted border controls and mitigation measures against New World screwworm in October. Unfortunately, a case of New World screwworm was detected in Chiapas in a calf in November on the 22nd, and the United States closed our southern border to Mexico for any bovine or bison crossings until Mexico can produce a written surveillance plan and we can establish protocols for mitigation measures that will include a 7-day quarantine after the treatments are given. So we are in the process of trying to work through how we can protect ourselves and still bring some cattle from Mexico into the United States, as this is important for both of our industries.
Well, Dr. Simmons, as I understand, the U.S. had New World screwworm in the past, but we eradicated it in the 1960s. How did we do that?
Well, we did eradicate New World screwworm in 1966, and we did that with a technique that was developed by USDA ARS called sterile insect technique. And this is where we take male sterile screwworm flies, screwworm flies, and we irradiate them to make them sterile. And then they are released in areas where we have the problem to mate with the females who mate only once. So that way, if these eggs are not viable and we don't get the larvae to hatch, we can eventually, over time, eliminate the population. And we have found that that is the most effective way to deal with this. So effective that when we did this, we established the U.S. Panama Commission for Eradication of Screwworm, or COPEG. And COPEG maintains in Panama a facility to produce these sterile male flies. Their maximum production is 100 million flies a week. And they use these flies when we see movements through Central America. Our goal has always been to keep the fly populations at the Darien Gap in Panama so that any influx from endemic South America is held up there and doesn't pass through Central America to Mexico to the United States.
Well, Dr. Simmons, would you tell us a bit more about how screwworms affect cattle?
Yes, we certainly can. As we said, the untreated infestation of this larva from the screwworms feeding on living tissue can result in death due to secondary infection and inflammation if untreated. So the key is to observe whether or not there are signs of New World screwworm. In the first 1 to 2 days, that can sometimes be difficult. But these animals will show signs of discomfort, decreased appetite, they'll isolate from the herd. There will usually be a draining wound with evidence, maybe a fly strike at the area or the eggs. The big thing is the stench or smell of decaying body tissue, and they even have trained dogs in Mexico to detect the stench of New World screwworm as part of their mitigation measures going through cattle that they are checking. Certainly the visible signs of maggots can be seen sometimes, and decaying body tissue.
So, Dr. Simmons, what should cattle producers be doing now to safeguard their herds, and what are some other symptoms they should be keeping an eye out for?
I think the big thing we're trying to do, we don't have it yet, that's the first thing we need to stress, but we need to be prepared to know what it is and what the signs are. So we are really mounting a producer education campaign at NCBA. We've dedicated a website to New World screwworm, and we're also putting out information to our affiliates to distribute to our grassroots cattle producers in the United States. Certainly, knowing the signs of it, looking at your cattle at least every 7 days, to see if there are any signs of any wounds or problems. If you're bringing new animals in, the same biosecurity you do for every other disease, probably need to isolate those animals from the herd for 7 days. And you need to be aware that if you suspect anything, to immediately call your veterinarian. It is a reportable disease. If your veterinarian believes that there is a problem, they can remove larvae and put them in media to send them off for identification. But you need to involve your veterinarian if you think there's a problem.
Well, Dr. Simmons, you briefly touched on biosecurity, but I'd like to talk a little bit more about that. We always talk about the importance of having biosecurity on your operation, regardless of the threat, but how can biosecurity practices help you in the case of preventing New World screwworm infestation?
Well, as I said, you need to certainly know what the signs are, know about the disease, and that's what we're trying to educate on. But biosecurity is fundamental to protecting your herd against the entry of any disease. And it aids in rapidly detecting any health problems in your herd. New entries, as I said, should be separated from the herd and should be observed for any signs of any disease, and that could be transferred to the larger herd. With screwworm, you want to look for the signs that we discussed. Also, you want to be aware that biosecurity means active observational surveillance. It means going out and looking at these animals on a regular basis. And with screwworm, if we do get it in this country, you're going to be looking at those animals at least once or twice a week.
Dr. Simmons, as we close out here, what do we need to do to get rid of these screwworms and the threat, and how is NCBA involved in that effort?
The U.S. is currently free of New World screwworm, but since it's been found in southern Mexico near the border of Guatemala, we need to work with Mexico to institute mitigation measures to control the border at Guatemala and also to control our border with Mexico. A lot of that is going to be based on what we know has worked in the past, and that is the sterile fly technique or the sterile insect technique. And we need more of these sterile flies. Currently, we only have the one production facility in Panama with 100 million flies a week potential capacity. We're going to need probably twice that many. So we are looking at trying to establish a facility in the United States. Mexico is looking about establishing a facility. Mexico was declared free in 1991, and shortly after that, they closed the facility that they had in Mexico. So they would need to either retrofit some existing facility or establish a new one. We would have to be looking to do the same. So we at NCBA are working to get USDA the resources they need to mount this effort. And that's dealing with disaster assistance funding, dealing with Senate and Appropriations Committee, this type of thing. But we are here using our lobbying arm to try to help USDA help us prevent this disease.
Well, Dr. Simmons, thank you so much for joining us today. And for all the latest information on the situation, please visit ncba.org/NWS.
This is the AgNet News Hour. We'll be back in just a moment. Wrapping up the day today with some news. The USDA's release of the 2024 Farm Sector Income Forecast shows lower income for U.S. farmers and ranchers. House Ag Committee Chair G.T. Thompson and Senate Ag Committee Ranking Member John Bozeman say the income update underscores what Ag Committee Republicans in the House and Senate have been warning about for 2 years. They said in a joint statement, America's farmers and ranchers are in serious trouble and the outlook remains grim. From 2023 to today, row crop producers alone have lost more than $50 billion and stand to lose even more next year. They also stressed that immediate action is required to stabilize the farm economy and prevent a crisis that will only get more expensive to address over time. They say reauthorizing a 5-year farm bill with significant improvements to the safety net is critical to restore certainty for our producers. They add that farmers and ranchers deserve better. Activist groups are calling it a victory for food and environmental safety as a federal district court ruled that genetically engineered organisms must be regulated. The ruling overturns the 2020 rule overhaul by the first Trump administration that eliminated most government oversight on GE crops, trees, and grasses. George Kimbrell, legal director for the lead plaintiff, Center for Food Safety, says USDA tried to hand over its job to Monsanto and the pesticide industry, and the court held that capitulation contrary to both law and science. They say this is a victory on behalf of farmers and science integrity. The plaintiffs say the ruling is a sharp rebuke of the Trump administration to almost eliminate oversight of all GE technology. The plaintiffs in the case included the National Family Farm Coalition, Friends of the Earth, the Pesticide Action Network, and several others. All were represented by the Center for Food Safety. That's our show for today. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. On behalf of Lorrie Boyer and myself, thank you for sharing your morning with us.
To get more information on the topics you heard today, visit AgNet West at agnetwest.com. You can also stay connected by following us on our social media at AgNet West on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Also look for Sabrina Halvorson on Facebook and be sure to subscribe to our podcast by searching for AgNet West on your podcast app. Thank you for listening to the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. AgNet West Radio Network, your primary choice for agriculture news.